My name is Florence Whitmore. I'm 69 years old. For most of my life, I was known as Gregory's wife and Heather's mom. I was a nurse for 32 years, but people remembered me more for the casseroles I brought to church than the patients I held the hands of in hospice. That's fine. I never needed recognition. I just needed to feel like I mattered to the people I gave my whole life to. Turns out, I didn't. When my husband died, Gregory, the man I cooked for, cleaned for, and stood beside through cancer scares and corporate lawsuits, my daughter Heather took one look at me and decided I was no longer necessary. Not long after the funeral, she sat across from me at our kitchen table. In the house I helped pay off with overtime night shifts and skipped vacations. Her hands were folded neatly, nails glossy and immaculate. "You're just dead weight now, Mom," she said, not cruelly, not even angrily, just efficiently, like she was updating a spreadsheet. Then she smiled, tight-lipped, polished, and added, "Dad left everything to me. The house, the investments, the $53 million in estate value, all of it. He trusted me to handle things." She handed me a folder, legal-looking documents, her name on everything, my name nowhere. I stared at the paper, then at her. She didn't blink. I stood up without a word, went to the bedroom, Gregory's side still untouched, and began to pack. 2 suitcases. 43 years of marriage, and I could fit my entire life into 2 modest bags. One filled with clothes, the other photographs no one ever asked about, but I kept anyway. I didn't cry when Heather and her husband Nolan drove me to a budget motel on the edge of town. I didn't say a word when they handed me $300 in cash, just to help you get settled somewhere, and drove off in Gregory's car. When the door clicked shut behind me at the Sunset Palms Motel, I stood in silence for a long time, watching a water stain crawl down the wall like it had a destination. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, stiff and low, and opened my phone. 3 days later, I was sitting in the office of my husband's attorney, Lucien Burke. His office smelled like cedar and paper. It had always made me feel safe. Today it made me feel like a stranger. He looked up from the file in his hands. His brow creased. "You weren't at the will reading, Florence." "No," I said, voice steady. "I wasn't invited." Lucien looked stunned. "Heather told me you were traveling." "In Europe," I raised an eyebrow. "I haven't left Oregon in 22 years. His lips tightened. He reached into a drawer and pulled out the original copy of Gregory's will. I could see my husband's signature before he even turned it toward me. His handwriting was as familiar as his laugh used to be. Then Lucien began to read, and when he reached line 42, everything changed. "In the event that my wife, Florence Whitmore, is coerced, displaced, or otherwise mistreated by any beneficiary of this estate following my death, said beneficiary's inheritance shall be rendered null and void. Assets shall revert in full to my wife, Florence, without exception." Line 42. Tucked between legalese and business trusts, my husband had left me a lifeline, a clause written like a whisper, buried like a secret weapon. Heather thought she'd won. She thought I'd walk away quietly like the dutiful mother I had always been. But Line 42 said otherwise. And karma? Karma came faster than she expected. If you've ever been made to feel like you're too old, too quiet, or too kind to fight back, stay with me. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about waking up, standing tall, and reclaiming what should never have been taken from you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Let's talk about it. And if this resonates, you know what to do. Subscribe and join me on this journey. The house was too quiet after Gregory's funeral, too wide, too clean, the kind of clean that meant no one was really living in it anymore. The bed was still made on his side. The dent in the armrest where he used to sit with the morning paper stared at me like a wound. And the refrigerator still had his favorite brand of orange marmalade, half used. For 3 days, I drifted between rooms like a ghost in a place I once called home. I didn't have the heart to touch anything, not the books he never finished, not the shirt still hanging in our shared closet. I found one of his ties on the back of the door and cried into it like it could bring him back. Gregory had always filled a room. He had that kind of presence. Even when he was silent, he made things feel anchored. Without him, everything floated, unmoored adrift, including me. People came and went. Neighbors brought casseroles. Church friends offered prayers. A few stayed for tea and quiet condolences, but most left quickly, their unease lingering like perfume. Nobody wants to sit too long with someone else's grief. Heather, however, stayed. At first, I thought it was compassion. She'd arrived the night Gregory passed, sobbing in the hospital waiting room, holding on to me like she was 5 again. I remember her knuckles white around my wrist, her face buried in my coat. "Mom," she had whispered through tears, "I don't know what we're going to do without him." And I believed her. For a moment, I saw the daughter I raised, the one who used to braid my hair while I cooked dinner, the girl who snuck into our bed during thunderstorms and refused to sleep unless she could touch both of us. But something changed after the funeral. The night we returned from the service, I caught her in Gregory's office, rifling through drawers. She claimed she was looking for photos. "For the slideshow," she said. There was no slideshow. I should have known then. But I was raw, disoriented. Grief does that. It fogs everything. It makes you want to believe the best in people, especially your own blood. Heather started reorganizing things almost immediately. She moved into the guest room without asking, rearranged furniture, called a contractor, just to get estimates. When I asked why she was changing things so soon, she tilted her head with that practiced patience she used when her kids whined too long. "Mom, this house is enormous. It's too much for you. Dad would have wanted it to be used properly used." The word made me flinch. I noticed Nolan, her husband, taking measurements in the living room. He acted like it was normal. Like walking around with a laser measurer in someone else's house was something everyone did while grieving. One afternoon, I returned from the pharmacy to find Heather on a Zoom call in the kitchen, discussing interior design changes with a realtor. She muted herself when she saw me. I stared at her. "What exactly are you planning?" She smiled, tight, controlled, professional. "Just exploring options." "You're not alone in this, Mom. We're a team, A team." That's when I felt it, the chill, the shift, like someone had slowly replaced the air in the house with something heavier, something calculated. I stood in the hallway that night, staring at the frame on the wall, our family portrait from 10 years ago. Gregory and I seated in the middle, Heather and her children beside us, arms linked, all forced smiles and matching sweaters. I stared at that image for a long time, wondering if Heather had ever actually looked at me the way I used to look at her, with unguarded love, with pride. When she came home later that night with Nolan, their voices low, their footsteps oddly careful, I watched from the shadow of the staircase. I saw the way they looked at each other, the nod, the unspoken understanding, like two people who had made a decision and were simply waiting for the right moment to execute it. And that's when I knew. Heather wasn't here to take care of me. She was here to take inventory. I once believed my daughter was the most beautiful thing I'd ever created. But the way she walked into our home after my husband's death, with that soft, polished smile and sharpened intentions, made something inside me go still. Not broken, just still. Like the hush before a storm. The sound of Heather's heels tapping down the hallway echoed in my bones. It was the same hallway I used to mop every Sunday afternoon, the same hardwood I once taught her to crawl across. Now it sounded like someone else's house, like I didn't belong. She moved with a kind of purpose I hadn't seen since she defended her thesis in college. Shoulders square, voice sharp, efficient. Behind her, Nolan trailed silently, eyes surveying the crown molding like a real estate agent noting potential upgrades. They didn't knock when they came in. They used the key. Gregory's key, the one he used to hang on. The brass hook beside the pantry, I hadn't had the heart to remove it since he passed. Now it hung on Heather's key ring, jangling next to her gym fob and a miniature bottle of imported hand sanitizer. I stood at the edge of the living room, still in my slippers, a paperback tucked in one hand I no longer remembered reading. My mouth tasted like metal, maybe from the tea I left cold on the stove, maybe from something deeper. Heather looked around like she was evaluating square footage, not memories. "Mom," she said, turning with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we need to talk." That phrase never led anywhere good. I didn't sit. I just watched as she settled herself on the couch like it belonged to her. She smoothed her skirt, crossed her legs, and gave Nolan a nod. He opened his laptop on the coffee table like he was preparing for a pitch. "You've been here alone for 6 weeks now," she began, her tone measured, rehearsed. "And I know it hasn't been easy. We've been thinking about what's best. For everyone. That word again, always used when someone's about to take something from you." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. "This," she said, laying it on the table, "is the updated will. Daddy made some changes you weren't aware of." She said daddy the way some women say Chanel, like it came with a price tag. I didn't move. "Gregory and I discussed his wishes thoroughly." She tilted her head with mock sympathy. "I know. But things change. He wanted me to handle everything." Nolan turned the folder toward me, opening it with the soft rustle of paper and betrayal. "Dad left everything to me," Heather continued, her voice sugar-coated with just enough authority to sting. "The house, the investment accounts, all his business assets. I'm the executor." I stared at the document. My name wasn't on it, not once. "You're welcome to stay temporarily," she added. "We'd never just throw you out, but we think it's time you considered a senior living arrangement, one with people your age, with activities and staff." She smiled again, wider this time, like she was offering me a vacation, not exile. "You wouldn't have to worry about a thing," Nolan chimed in, as if that was reassurance. Heather leaned forward and touched my knee, an action that felt more like marking territory than affection. "Mom, you've done enough. Let us take care of you now, take care of me. Like a project, like a liability." I looked past her to the bookshelf where Gregory's collection of first editions still stood, undisturbed. The same shelf I dusted every week, the same books we used to argue about, him loving economics, me preferring poetry. They hadn't packed those yet, but they would. I stood there, unmoving. I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I just listened to the echo of Heather's voice and Nolan's keyboard tapping as he typed something, probably notes about the conversation, maybe a checklist. Heather stood, brushing imaginary lint from her blazer. "We'll give you time to think, of course. There's a lovely facility just off Maple Ridge. We've already spoken with the admissions director." Of course they had. Nolan gathered the documents neatly, sliding them back into the folder like it was a closed deal. "This will be easier for everyone," he said. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because I knew they weren't listening. Heather stepped closer. "You're not alone, Mom. You'll be taken care of." I heard the words, but what I really heard was the sound of her heels on the floorboards as she turned away, steady, final. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a transaction, and I was no longer part of the ledger. I was sitting on the edge of the guest bed, my new bedroom apparently, when I heard the front door open and shut with precision. Not a slam, not a knock, just a click, clean, controlled. Heather didn't call out my name. Nolan didn't clear his throat. They walked down the hall like they lived there, because now they did. The suitcase wheels made a scratchy sound against the oak floor, an abrasive whisper. I stayed seated, hands folded on my lap, staring at the old lace curtain catching what little sunlight filtered through the blinds. The air in the room was still, heavy, like it was holding its breath for me. Heather stood in the doorway first, dressed in black again, not for mourning, for power. A perfectly cinched belt, designer flats, fresh manicure. Her mouth was pinched in that polite way that says, "Let's just get this over with." Nolan followed, carrying 2 large canvas storage boxes. His eyes scanned the room without meeting mine, like I was already part of the past. Something dusty, disposable. "Mom," Heather said, "we've made a decision." She didn't wait for me to respond. "We've given you some space these last few weeks, time to grieve, time to adjust, but it's time to move forward, for all of us. All of us." She said it like this was a family meeting, like there was any us left. Nolan placed the boxes on the floor with a thunk and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me like a hotel bill. "It's a list of places," Heather explained. "Assisted living communities nearby, clean, safe. Some even have watercolor classes. You'd love that." Her tone dripped with artificial warmth. I almost admired the performance. I looked down at the list. 10 addresses, one circled in red ink. Maple Hill Haven. I'd heard of it. Barely one step up from a hospice ward, a waiting room for the forgotten. I didn't speak. Heather sighed. "We've already spoken with the director. They've got a room available starting next week. Nolan and I are covering the first month's fee. After that, well, we'll figure something out." Nolan stepped forward and placed a small envelope on the nightstand. "There's $300 in here for incidentals. Cab fare? Groceries until you're settled?" I blinked. $300 after 43 years of partnership. After 2 decades of raising Heather through colic and chicken pox and heartbreak, after all the birthdays and back-to-school nights and baked lasagnas, after all of Gregory's illnesses, $300 and a list of institutions. "Charming," I said softly. Heather crossed her arms. "Don't be dramatic. We're not throwing you out." I turned my head slowly. "You're standing in my bedroom with suitcases and a list of old folks' homes, Heather. What exactly would you call it?" She flinched, just slightly, then composed herself. "This is what Dad wanted," she said. "He trusted me to handle everything, to protect his legacy." Her voice cracked a little on that last word, and I saw it. The tiny flicker of doubt behind her eyes, but it disappeared as fast as it came. Then she moved toward the dresser and reached for the only thing on top of it, a framed wedding photo of Gregory and me. It was the one we took in the church courtyard, sunlight catching his glasses, my veil askew from laughter. Without a second glance, Heather popped the backing and slid the photo out. She dropped it into one of the boxes and tossed the frame aside. The glass cracked against the hardwood with a crisp, decisive snap. That was the moment. That was when the air left the room. When something inside me stopped pleading, stopped hoping. "Pack whatever you need," she said. "We'll help you move this weekend." I nodded, but I didn't look at her again. They left the room. Nolan closed the door behind him without a word. I listened to their footsteps retreat down the hall. Heather's brisk and unapologetic. Nolan's slower, heavier, but just as final. When I was sure they were gone, I stood and looked around. The boxes, the list, the envelope with $300, the cracked frame on the floor. 43 years. Reduced to 2 suitcases and a list of facilities where people went to fade quietly. I crouched, picked up the photo from the floor and cradled it in my lap. Gregory's smile stared up at me, frozen in time. I brushed a fingertip over his face. "Guess I'm not your responsibility anymore," I whispered. Then I folded the photo gently and slid it into the side pocket of my suitcase. My fingers trembled, but my spine did not. They thought I'd walk away defeated. They thought I'd go quietly. They had no idea what was waiting for them in line 42. The Sunset Palms Motel sat between a shuttered diner and a tire shop with a flickering neon sign that hadn't worked properly since 2004. The kind of place where people didn't stay. They stalled. On the surface, it looked like somewhere you'd pass by without thinking. But that night, it became the only place that would take me in. The man at the front desk didn't ask questions. He just handed me a key with the number 7 on it and slid my ID back across the counter like it was something fragile. The room smelled like mildew and old cigarettes masked by lemon-scented cleaner. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners. The carpet had a pattern that may have once been floral. Now it just looked tired. I placed my 2 suitcases at the foot of the bed and sat down slowly, the mattress creaking under my weight like it had something to say. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stared at the door. Not because I expected someone to knock, but because part of me still hoped it was all a test. That Heather would show up, remorseful. That Nolan would apologize. That someone, anyone, would say, "We're sorry, we were wrong." But the silence stayed. There was a mirror above the dresser, wide, smudged, indifferent. I walked toward it and looked at myself for the first time in what felt like weeks. I didn't recognize the woman staring back, not because she looked old, but because she looked erased, like someone who had been overwritten too many times. Lines carved around my mouth that didn't used to be there, eyes that had seen too much but still searched for something, dignity maybe, or just proof that I still existed. I touched my cheek, tracing the tired skin with 2 fingers, and asked myself the question I had avoided for years. How did I become invisible in my own life? Behind me, the lamp buzzed faintly. I sat at the edge of the bed and reached for my purse. Out of habit, I pulled out the envelope Heather had given me. I counted the cash. $300, neatly folded like hush money. I placed it back in the envelope and tucked it in the drawer without a word. Next came the photo, the one from our wedding. Gregory, in his too big tuxedo, smiling like he'd just pulled off the greatest con, marrying me. I had a daisy in my hair and a sunburn on my nose. We looked ridiculous and happy and stupidly young. I held it in my lap and let the silence settle again. That's when I remembered. It was about 6 months before Gregory died. We were having breakfast. Scrambled eggs, rye toast, the usual. He'd been quiet all morning, pushing food around his plate like his thoughts were too loud to make room for appetite. Then he asked me something I hadn't thought about since. Not until now. "Flo," he said, not looking up, "do you think Heather would take care of you if I wasn't around?" I'd laughed, softly. "Of course. She loves me." He didn't laugh back. He just nodded and murmured, "You always see the best in people." Then he went back to his eggs like he hadn't just cracked something open between us. Back then, I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to. Sometimes love makes you complicit in your own denial. But sitting there, in that dingy motel room with a broken heater and a dripping faucet, his voice echoed louder than it ever had. "Do you think Heather would take care of you?" Now I knew the answer. Number. No, she wouldn't. She didn't. And maybe, just maybe, Gregory knew it too. I looked back at the mirror. The woman staring at me wasn't erased anymore. She was resurfacing, slowly, painfully, but surely. My phone was still in my purse, the screen cracked at the corner from a fall last winter. I unlocked it and opened the browser. I typed 3 words, Lucien Burke Attorney, because if Gregory had known who Heather really was, then maybe he had done something about it, and I was going to find out. The brass handle on the office door felt colder than it should have. Maybe it was just me. Or maybe it was the ghost of a memory brushing past my fingers, because the last time I'd stood outside Lucien Burke's law office, my husband was still alive and holding my hand. The door creaked open, and the same wooden plaque greeted me. Burke and Mason, LLP. Estates and legacy law only. Now it was just Burke. Mason had retired 2 years ago. I remembered Gregory mentioning it. The waiting room still smelled like polished wood and stale mints. I smoothed my coat, an old gray wool thing that used to belong to my mother, and stepped up to the receptionist. Her eyes flicked up, hesitated, then softened. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "But if Mr. Burke is available, tell him. Florence Whitmore is here." I wasn't sure if the name would mean anything anymore, but it did. Within minutes, I was ushered down a narrow hallway and into an office lined with books and quiet. Lucian was standing behind his desk, flipping through a leather-bound file when he looked up and froze. "Florence?" His voice cracked like the spine of an old book. "My God!" He moved around the desk to greet me, then hesitated, perhaps unsure whether to offer a handshake or a hug. I spared him the choice and gave a small nod. "I didn't expect to see you," he said, still stunned. "I thought you were—" He trailed off. "In Europe," I offered, my tone flat. He blinked. "Yes, that's what Heather told me. She said you'd taken some time to travel after Gregory passed, that you needed distance and silence." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I've barely left my ZIP code in 20 years. Lucian's face darkened. He gestured for me to sit. "You weren't traveling?" "I was packing." Out of my house, with $300 in an envelope and an address to a care facility taped to it. He sat slowly, his hands folding like paper. That's not what I was told at all." I studied his eyes, still sharp, still kind, but now clouded with guilt. "Lucienne," I said, "did Gregory leave me anything? Or did he really give it all to Heather?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder with Gregory's name embossed on the label. As he flipped through, the pages, a familiar rhythm filled the room. The whisper of thick paper, the sigh of a man realizing something had gone terribly wrong. "I tried to call you," he muttered, almost to himself, "twice. Left voicemails, no answer. I even mailed a certified letter. Heather called back and said you were unreachable overseas. She asked me to read the will without you. And you believed her?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "She's your daughter, Florence." I had no reason to doubt her, until now. He laid the document in front of me. "This," he said, tapping the paper, "is Gregory's original notarized will. It's been sealed since he passed. I read it aloud in my office. Heather and her husband were present. No one else." My eyes scanned the lines, familiar in tone. Gregory had always spoken like he was giving a toast, even in print. The usual preamble about love, memory, legacy. Then I reached line 42. "In the event of my passing, I leave all liquid assets, investments, and our marital home to my beloved wife, Florence Whitmore, with the stipulation that our daughter Heather may inherit only upon Florence's own passing, or at Florence's discretion." My fingers trembled. "All of it," I whispered. "He left it to me." Lucian nodded. "Every cent. The home, the accounts, the trust. You're the primary beneficiary." "But she said—" I looked up. "She showed me something. Said it was from you, a copy of the will. It had your letterhead, your seal." His mouth set in a firm line. "Florence, I never wrote any letter to you, and there's only one copy of this will. The original." In my safe, I sat back. The room swam for a moment. I felt equal parts foolish and furious. Heather had lied about everything. "She played me," I said, the words thick and bitter. "She orchestrated the reading, took everything, and made it look official." Lucian leaned forward. "We can file a petition immediately. Fraud on this level. It's serious. This could go to court." I looked at him, at the mahogany desk that once cradled my husband's last wishes, at the truth finally rising like a bruise under skin. I smiled, not out of joy, but because something inside me had shifted, a current, quiet but unstoppable. Heather thought she'd won, but the real story was only beginning. My fingers hovered above the paper, not quite touching it as if the ink itself might burn, but my eyes had already memorized every word. Line 42. Any individual who, through coercion, deception, or undue influence, attempts to dispossess or manipulate Mrs. Florence Whitmore shall be permanently disinherited. This clause shall be executed immediately upon violation. Without contest, I read it once, then again, and then a third time, aloud, just to hear it with my own ears. Lucian sat across from me, watching with something between sorrow and vindication. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The room felt thick with ghosts. Gregory's presence wasn't just in the clause, it was in the cadence, the clarity, the unmistakable foresight. "Did he add this recently?" I asked, voice barely above a breath. Lucian nodded. 6 months before his death. Came in alone. Said he wanted to update the document, just one clause. I remember the exact words he used when I asked why. What did he say? Lucian's eyes softened. He said, "Because sometimes even your own blood can't be trusted when there's money on the table." I exhaled slowly, like the truth itself was too big for my lungs. All this time. Gregory had known. He'd seen the cracks in Heather's smile. He'd heard the greedy edge in her voice when she thought no one noticed. Maybe he'd overheard things. Maybe he'd seen the way Nolan scanned his office like a scavenger circling prey. And yet, he'd never said a word, never warned me, never changed how he treated her, because he knew something deeper, that I wouldn't believe it until it happened. And when it did, he made sure I wouldn't be left defenseless. That line wasn't just legal protection. It was a whisper from beyond the veil, a final act of love wrapped in litigation. "Does she know?" I asked. "Did Heather ever see this version?" Lucian shook his head. "I never shared the updated draft with her. Gregory asked me to keep it sealed until the official reading, which, as you know now, she hijacked." I pressed my palm against the page. The texture was thick, real. None of the glossy forgery Heather had flashed in front of me that day. My name, my home, my husband's last words, all still mine. A cold, slow satisfaction crawled up my spine. Not the fiery burst of revenge. No, that wasn't my style. This was something deeper, icy, precise. Heather had played her hand with all the smugness of a victor, but the war wasn't over. "I want to enforce it," I said, my voice steady. Lucien leaned in. "You have every right to. Based on the clause, we can file a motion to revoke her access to the estate, freeze any assets she's touched, and legally remove her from the home." "And the $53 million? He nodded. "Every cent would revert to you, plus penalties. I traced the edge of the clause with my fingertip, as if sealing it into my skin. Gregory's voice echoed in my memory, soft, familiar. "I know her, Florence. I know what she's capable of when no one's watching." I hadn't believed him then, but I believed now. The Florence who sat in that chair wasn't the same woman who had once stepped aside to keep peace in the family. She wasn't the mother who smiled and bit her tongue. She was the widow who'd been pushed to the edge, and instead of falling, she'd landed on solid ground, built from line 42. I folded the document and placed it gently into my bag, like cradling a sacred artifact. "File everything," I told Lucian, "but do it quietly. I want her to feel safe, to think she's won. I want her to be blindsided, just like I was." Lucian hesitated for only a second. Then he smiled. Just a flicker. "You always were more strategic than people gave you credit for." I rose from the chair and adjusted my coat. In the reflection of the glass cabinet, I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like someone with purpose. Gregory had given me the match. Now it was up to me to strike it. The sun filtered weakly through the yellowing curtains of the motel window. Outside, a lawnmower groaned somewhere in the distance, an ordinary sound on a not-so-ordinary day. On the chip nightstand beside me, sat a single glass of water, and in it I placed a carnation. One stem, pale pink, Gregory's favorite flower to gift me. Every year on my birthday, no matter how tight the budget or how busy the clinic, he would leave one on my nightstand. Never red roses, always carnations. They're humble, he used to say, but they last. Just like you, I touched the petals. They were soft, just beginning to curl at the edges. So was I, maybe, but not today. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and picked up the motel phone. No trembling hands, no teary voice, just stillness, clarity. The first number I dialed was Lucian's. He answered on the first ring. "It's me," I said. "Let's move forward. I want the motion filed today, and I'd like a formal injunction on the estate and accounts." His voice was calm but energized. "I've already prepared the documentation. All I needed was your word." "You have it," I said. "Florence, this will be public. There'll be blowback. Let them talk," I replied. "I've been invisible long enough. Let them finally see me." Click. Call 1. Done. I pulled out a worn leather folder from my suitcase. In it were copies of Gregory's banking instructions, safety deposit box numbers, notarized power of attorney, years of quiet trust tucked between recipes and tax returns. Heather must have assumed I wouldn't know where to look. She'd underestimated just how deeply I had built that life with Gregory. Next, I called our bank. "Hello, this is Margaret at First Valley Savings. How may I help you?" I gave my name, my account number, verification. Then the request. "Freeze all joint assets pending legal clarification." I explained there had been suspected forgery and asset misappropriation. The tone of my voice did the work my lawyer couldn't. "Understood," the woman said. "Would you like us to flag for internal review as well?" "Yes, and please record this call." Click. Call 2. Done. I took a sip from the glass with the carnation. The water was faintly bitter, chlorinated. But the flower held its shape. Third call, the most delicate one. I dialed the precinct. Detective Rosenthal, a man Gregory had golfed with for decades. He'd attended the funeral, brought his wife, left a card. I'd never opened. "Detective Rosenthal," I said when he picked up. "This is Florence Whitmore. I need to report a potential case of inheritance fraud." A pause. "Florence? My God, what's going on?" "I believe my daughter forged legal documents. She claimed I was traveling abroad during the will reading. I have evidence that proves otherwise, including a sealed clause that disinherits her, effective immediately. He didn't ask if I was sure. He knew better." "I'll need to schedule a statement," he said. "We'll open a formal investigation." "I'd appreciate discretion." "You'll have it." Click. Call 3. Done. I stared at the wall. Beige, peeling, forgettable. Just like me in Heather's eyes. But what she didn't understand, what so many people fail to understand, is that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. All my life, I had been the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, the one who stepped back so others could shine, the one who folded the laundry, remembered birthdays, paid bills, kissed foreheads, and asked for nothing. And what did it buy me? An eviction notice, a forged will, $300 and a one-way ticket to obscurity. No more. I glanced again at the carnation. It floated perfectly still in the glass. Fragile, but unbent. This time, I wouldn't break. This time, I would make them see what happens when the woman they counted out decides she's had enough, and the first domino had already fallen. It didn't take long. By morning, the ripples had started. I sat by the motel window, the same chipped sill where I'd watched the sunrise for the past few days, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt paper. The air smelled of mildew and asphalt, and yet something about it felt victorious. Gregory would have laughed. "It's the small winds, Flo," he used to say, "that let you keep going till the big ones land." At 9:13 a.m., my phone lit up. Not a call, a news alert. Whitmore estate accounts frozen for legal review amidst inheritance dispute. A tiny smile crept onto my face. At 10:42 a.m., the real show began. Heather. She had always loved a particular cafe in town, Lavelle's, an overpriced little place with white marble countertops and lavender foam on their cappuccinos. Her favorite seat was by the window, where people could see her pretending to read The Economist while scrolling through her influencer feed. And that's where she was when the card declined. I didn't see it in person, but I didn't need to. Nolan posted a filtered photo of their brunch, eggs Benedict with truffle oil, champagne on the side, just minutes before it happened. Then, radio silence. Until 11:03 a.m. My phone rang. Heather's name blinked on the screen, desperate and bright. I let it buzz twice before answering, calm, balanced. Hello? Her voice came out half whisper, half accusation. Mom? What's going on? My card just got declined. At Lavelle's, I had to leave like a criminal. There's some kind of hold on our accounts. They're saying something about legal claims. I could almost hear the cafe door swinging behind her, the gasping pride, the slow panic. I took a long breath. Then I answered simply, Line 42, Heather. Did you not read it? Silence. A full 10 seconds. What do you mean? You signed it. Or forged it. Either way, it's in the original will. Any individual proven to have deceived or manipulated Florence Whitmore in the matter of inheritance shall be immediately disinherited. It's enforceable, effective immediately. That's what line 42 means. You can't be serious. I'm only quoting your father. It was his voice behind those words. I simply followed them. Mom, this isn't fair. The cafe noise faded behind her. Car horns, the shuffle of bags, her breath catching as she walked briskly into the street, trying to make sense of her crumbling empire. I didn't gloat, I didn't laugh, I just let it sit. This isn't how families should treat each other, she finally added, almost with a whimper. No, I said, it isn't. Click. No yelling, no lectures, just a single sentence, and a door that finally closed. I stood and walked to the mirror, catching my reflection. For once, I didn't look like someone shrinking. I looked like someone returning. Later that afternoon, Lucian called. The accounts are frozen across the board, he said. All 18 of them, offshore, joint, and hidden subsidiaries. Some of them were opened in Nevada under shell names, but they're linked to Heather through Nolan's real estate holdings. How soon until court? Soon. They're panicking. I wouldn't be surprised if she reaches out again, this time with fake tears. She already tried guilt, I said. Didn't work. Lucian paused. Gregory knew what he was doing when he wrote that clause. Yes, I murmured. He knew our daughter. I didn't feel proud. I felt steady, settled. Like a house that had been shaking in the wind finally had its foundation secured, because that was what line 42 truly was, a foundation, a line drawn in stone, a voice from the grave that said, enough. And now the consequences had only just begun. It started with a folder Lucian handed me, nothing dramatic, just a manila envelope sealed with a paperclip and the faint smell of fresh ink. He slid it across the table like a quiet offering. Thought you might want to see these. Inside were documents I hadn't requested, but now couldn't ignore. Not just financial records, background checks, employment history, property acquisitions, business filings. And there, 3 pages in, was the detail that stopped me cold. Nolan Barrett, former probate consultant, specialized in estate transitions, particularly high net worth private families, until 2014. I blinked at the page. Nolan. Gregory and I had always assumed Heather fell for him because he was safe, stable, the quiet type, the kind who held her coat and didn't argue at restaurants. But now, I saw the outline of something far colder, the kind of man who didn't need to shout to be dangerous. He planned. He anticipated, and most importantly, he let others get their hands dirty. Heather had always been hungry, She wanted the designer bags, the private Pilates instructors, the wine club memberships she never drank from. But planning, that wasn't her style. She was impulsive, spoiled, not strategic. I stared at the lines of Nolan's resume, my fingers tightening. 10 years ago, he quietly left his role in estate law. No scandals, no lawsuits, just stepped away. A clean exit. Lucian's voice broke the silence. You never knew? I shook my head slowly. He told us he worked in corporate real estate. Managed renovations for trust properties. Lucian gave a grim smile. Not entirely false. Most probate firms do spin their titles. Easier to avoid scrutiny, I thought back. Back to the first Christmas he came over, how he'd watched Gregory open a bottle of aged Glenlivet, his eyes calculating even when he smiled, how he never once looked lost in our home, as if he already knew the blueprint. My throat tightened. I had been so distracted by Heather's cruelty, by her betrayal, that I'd missed the shadow beside her, the one whispering, guiding, orchestrating. She may have held the knife, but Nolan had sharpened it. Heather forged your signature, Lucian continued, but the forgery wasn't amateur. It mirrored the ink pattern of your old checks. That takes access, and a very steady hand. My stomach churned. How long would it have taken him to plan this? Lucian shrugged. Hard to say. Months. Years. Maybe years. That word echoed in my chest like a storm. Had they been laying the groundwork while Gregory was still alive? Had Nolan mapped out every step, isolating me, manipulating Heather, planting the fake documents, setting up shell accounts? Had he watched Gregory die knowing full well what he'd take next? I stood up abruptly, needing air. The room felt too tight, too thick with betrayal layered on top of betrayal. Through the window, the city moved on, cars crawling by, people on lunch breaks, no one knowing that just 2 floors above, a woman had discovered her life had been played like a game of chess, and she'd never even known the board existed. Nolan's careful, I said aloud, mostly to myself. He'll cover his tracks. Lucian nodded. But he didn't count on you reading between the lines. Most people don't. I turned back to the table and gathered the papers. Heather had always been the obvious enemy, but now I knew better. The real threat wore fitted blazers and neutral smiles, and I was done playing their pawn. Now it was my move, and I was no longer playing by their rules. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the light was soft but unkind, too honest, too clear. I was slicing an apple, slowly, each cut deliberate. A quiet rhythm against the silence of my kitchen, the one Gregory and I had built together, the one that had been scrubbed of my presence for 3 long echoing weeks. Now it was mine again. Everything smelled of wood polish and jasmine tea, calm, controlled, reclaimed. And then the knock, 3 times, sharp, panicked, uncertain. I didn't hurry. When I opened the door, I saw her, Heather. Mascara streaked, hair wild like she'd run through a storm. She looked smaller somehow, like the anger had drained from her bones and left only a hollow girl wrapped in designer guilt. "Mom," she whispered, "please." I said nothing, just leaned slightly against the doorframe, steadying myself against the tide I knew was coming. Tears spilled. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't really think it would get this far. I just wanted what Dad left. I thought you'd be okay. I thought you had other plans or something. I almost laughed at that. Other plans? As in a beachfront retirement funded by betrayal? I didn't mean to hurt you, she said quickly, eyes darting past me like maybe she could still be let in. Like maybe the warmth of the house might melt the wall she'd built between us. But the door frame stayed cold. So did I. Nolan. He said he knew how to handle everything, Heather continued. He said you wouldn't fight. That you were old. That you'd let it go. There it was. Not just betrayal, contempt. They hadn't counted on me reading the fine print. They'd counted on me disappearing. I crossed my arms. Is that why you had the locks changed before the funeral flowers had even wilted? She winced. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. No, I said, soft but sharp. You did know. You just didn't think I'd matter. That landed. She looked like I'd slapped her. Please, she whispered again. Can't we just go back? I was wrong. Nolan's gone. He left. He ran the second things got complicated. He never loved me, Mom. He used me. I let the silence sit between us like a third presence. Then she said it, softly, desperately. Mom, say something. I looked at her. This woman who used to wear pigtails and scuff her shoes against the kitchen tile, this woman who stood in my foyer and stripped away 43 years of marriage with a forged signature and a lie. I took a breath. You should be more afraid of the law than of me, I said quietly, because I'm not your judge. But it's coming, and this time you won't be able to talk your way out of it. Her lip quivered. I don't have anywhere to go. That hurt. More than I wanted to admit. But I remembered the motel room, the cinder block walls, the silence, the cam chuang wilting in its glass. I didn't either, I said. For 3 days. I began to close the door. She lunged forward slightly, not enough to step inside, but enough to make the air between us electric. Mom, please. Just forgive me that word. Forgive. As if it were a coat I could put on, as if it hadn't been buried under layers of frost and silence and loss. I don't hate you, Heather, I said, but forgiveness doesn't come with a key to this house. Click. The door shut with a whisper, not a slam, not rage, just finality. I stood behind the door for a while after that, listening to her footsteps fade down the stone path, one uncertain step at a time. Then I turned back to the kitchen, poured myself tea, and sat in the same seat Gregory once did when he told me that love was not just a word, it was an action. And inaction sometimes was the only way to truly protect it. The call came just past midnight. I was halfway through folding Gregory's old sweater, one I kept, not because it still smelled like him, but because it didn't. It had been a quiet evening. Tea. A book I wasn't really reading. The windows fogged slightly from the inside. Everything was muted, still, safe. Then the phone rang. Not the cell. The landline. The one no one ever called. I let it ring twice before picking up. Hello? There was a breath on the other end, long, waited. Then, Mrs. Whitmore. Or should I say, Florence now. My grip tightened on the receiver. I knew that voice. Even soaked in silk and smugness, I'd recognize it anywhere. Nolan, he chuckled. Impressive. I thought you'd have changed the number by now. You thought a lot of things, I replied. Most of them wrong. There was silence. Then the scrape of a chair leg, perhaps, a low hum of jazz in the background. Nolan never did anything without atmosphere. I suppose congratulations are in order, he said smoothly. You've played the long game well. The account's frozen. The house back in your name. Heather crying into her kombucha somewhere in the suburbs. If you're calling to confess, I'd suggest doing it with your lawyer on the line. He ignored that. But you see, Florence, I've always had a deep appreciation for leverage. The kind that doesn't appear in wills or bank accounts. I stayed quiet. My silence was an invitation. He took it. Did Gregory ever tell you about Montreal? He asked, voice dipped in something poisonous. The name hit like a dropped glass. Montreal, a city Gregory visited only once, on a trip I wasn't allowed to join. Business, he had said. No spouses. Just a quick negotiation that had been 21 years ago. My throat felt dry. What are you implying? Oh, nothing, Nolan replied, far too casually. Just that sometimes the past isn't quite as buried as we think. And that dear Gregory, bless his soul, wasn't always the clean-cut gentleman you remember. He paused for effect. Then, leaned in, audibly closer to his phone. Line 42 was smart, I'll give him that. But what if the man who wrote it had things to hide? You're bluffing, I said, though my voice wavered slightly. Gregory wasn't perfect, but he was honorable. Nolan chuckled again, low and amused. Honor is subjective. So is truth. But fear? That's always clear. I stood up. My heart was beating faster now, but not from fear, from something sharper, aware, ready. Why are you calling? I asked. Let's just say, he said slowly, that I'm not entirely done playing. I may be out of your accounts, Florence, but don't mistake that for irrelevance. I still have cards, and some of them have your husband's name written all over them. You're a coward, I said. You used Heather. You forged documents, and now you're grasping at shadows to stay in the game. His voice dropped. Just know that ghosts have teeth. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver in my hand, the dial tone buzzing faintly like static beneath my ribs. Montreal. A name. A threat. A key? I didn't know if Nolan was bluffing or baiting me, or both. But something shifted in the air that night. The past, it seemed, wasn't quite finished with me, and Gregory's legacy might hold more than just love letters and legal lines. I folded the sweater slowly, my fingers tracing the edge of its collar. Then I walked to his old study. Time to open drawers I had left untouched for over 2 decades. Gregory's study had always felt like a sealed chamber. Even when he was alive, he kept the door half closed most days, a sanctuary of mahogany, ledgers, and dust. I hadn't stepped inside since his death, not because of grief, but because the silence in there felt too loud, like the room itself was still waiting for his return. But after Nolan's call, that silence no longer scared me. It dared me. The doorknob turned with a soft click. The scent was the same, cedar and ink, paper aged to a golden hue. I flipped the switch. The single overhead bulb flickered before casting a pale yellow light across the bookshelves, the filing cabinets, the worn leather chair that still held his shape. My eyes scanned the room like a stranger in my own home. I moved first to the desk drawers. They groaned open. Old fountain pens, neatly wrapped checkbooks, a photo of me and Heather from a long-forgotten summer picnic. I stared at it for a moment. The smile on her face felt artificial now, even in retrospect. Gregory had framed it in silver. I slid it gently aside. Then came the second drawer, the one he always locked. I found the spare key tucked behind a row of tax books. Inside was a manila folder. No label, just thick with age and tension. I sat down and opened it. First were the transaction receipts, wire transfers to a medical consulting firm based in Nevada. Large sums, $220,000 here, $410,000 there. The payee names didn't mean anything to me. Then I saw the letterhead, Caduceus Integration Group. The name felt clinical, too polished. Beneath the receipts was a thick bundle of papers, bound with a black paperclip. A report, neatly typed, dates stretching back 15 years. The first page read, Joint Private Investment Agreement, Caduceus Integration Group / G. Whitmore Private Equity Stakeholder. My pulse quickened. I flipped the pages. Medical jargon, ROI graphs, references to patient optimization metrics and claim routing algorithms. But one word stopped me cold. Fraud. It appeared in an internal memo. The concern is growing over the whistleblower allegations from within Caduceus that patient claims have been rerouted through shell clinics to maximize insurance billing. G. Whitmore has been notified. My breath caught. Gregory knew, and he stayed. Another memo, dated 2 years later, from a lawyer. Pending litigation expected in Q2. Recommend silent divestment to avoid reputational damage. But there was no divestment confirmation, just more transfers. He'd stayed in, quietly, maybe even strategically. I leaned back, stunned. Nolan hadn't been bluffing. He had known, at least enough to drop breadcrumbs. But why hadn't Gregory told me? Why invest in something so ethically murky? He was a cautious man, not greedy, not reckless. I dug deeper. Taped to the back of the file was a yellowed envelope with my name in his handwriting. Florence. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a single-page letter. My dearest Florence, if you're reading this, I failed to keep it from you. I invested in Caduceus because I believed in their mission. They promise streamlined care for underfunded communities, but over time, I sensed something was wrong. And yet, I stayed. Not for the money. I told myself I could push from within, influence their direction. I was wrong. By the time I knew how deep it ran, pulling out would have implicated everything, including our estate. I kept it from you to protect you. That's not a justification, only a truth. I set up contingency plans. If anything ever came to light, you'd be shielded. The trusts, the clauses. Line 42 wasn't just about Heather. It was about this. You were always my compass. I'm sorry I veered from it. Forgive me, if you can. Gregory I sat in silence. The letter trembled slightly in my hands, so he had made a mistake, but he'd tried to contain it, to protect me in the only way he knew how, through silence and control. And in doing so, he'd left me with a box full of answers and an entire new burden of truth. Gregory had not been the marble statue I once believed him to be. He was flawed, human, and maybe, just maybe, still good. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back into the envelope, then into the folder. The man I loved had tried to outmaneuver consequences with paperwork and preemptive apologies. But Nolan had held this over me like a loaded weapon. And now, I understood why. He wasn't done. But neither was I. I stood, the envelope pressed to my chest. The final piece had fallen into place. The game board was complete. And I, Florence Whitmore, was no longer just playing defense. I hadn't worn Gregory's coat since the winter he was first diagnosed. It still smelled faintly of leather and old cologne. The sleeves were too long, the shoulders too broad, but it wrapped around me like armor. I didn't wear it for sentiment. I wore it for war. 2 days after discovering the files, I walked into the investigator's office. Not the police, not the family lawyer, but a private forensic consultant Gregory had once mentioned during a dispute with a former business partner. She had a reputation for discretion, precision, and a particular disdain for corporate fraud. Her name was Dana Morales. She didn't ask why a 70-year-old widow was sitting across from her in a coat 10 years out of season, clutching a manila folder like a lifeline. She simply said, "Show me." I laid it all out. Bank transfers, memos, Gregory's letter, my suspicions about Nolan and Heather, the forged power of attorney documents I discovered tucked into Nolan's prior correspondence. Dana flipped through each page with surgical focus. "You've done half my job already," she muttered, almost amused. I smiled tightly. I've had time. And motivation. What followed was a methodical reconstruction. We traced Nolan's connections to the shell companies mentioned in the Caduceus report. Dana pulled phone records, reviewed timestamps on the fake legal letters sent to me, and compared signatures across a decade of filings. It was all there, a web of manipulation that Nolan had orchestrated, with Heather either complicit or completely out of her depth. I wasn't sure which was worse anymore. Your husband's original shares were absorbed into a blind trust 2 years ago, Dana noted, circling a date. But someone rerouted the income into a proxy account under your daughter's name, with Nolan listed as power of attorney. She looked up. That's felony-level fraud. I said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Can we prove it in court?" Dana tilted her head. "We don't need court. We just need the threat of it. People like Nolan? They fold fast when the spotlight turns their way." That night, I walked out of her office into the sharp autumn wind, Gregory's coat heavy on my shoulders, but my spine straighter than it had been in weeks. I wasn't simply reclaiming what had been taken. I was rewriting the narrative. The next morning, Dana delivered cease and desist letters to 3 firms affiliated with Nolan's holdings. One of them replied within hours, disavowing knowledge and offering to cooperate with authorities. By noon, we had a response from Nolan's attorney, thinly veiled panic behind polished legalese. I smiled as I read it. Let them scramble. For years, I'd cooked every holiday meal, held every hand through sickness, and stood quietly in the shadows of boardrooms and business meetings. But today, I stood at the center, no longer the grieving widow, no longer the unwanted mother, and certainly no longer the victim. I slipped my hand into the coat pocket and found something unexpected, a receipt from a flower shop dated 2 weeks before Gregory died. He had ordered carnations again, for my birthday. Even in the middle of his secrets, he hadn't forgotten. I looked out the window into the wind-blown morning. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, truth, balance, justice, served in silence. And I was just getting started. The walls of my new home are pale sage, not white, too sterile, not beige, too afraid. Sage is the color of renewal, of something wise and soft but unafraid to grow again. I picked it myself. This place isn't large. 2 bedrooms, 1 sunroom, and an attic I turned into a studio. But every corner, every curtain, every surface carries a choice that is mine. No shadows of someone else's taste, no compromises to appease others, just me. I have a ritual now. I start each morning at the bay window, holding a mug of cinnamon tea, watching light stretch slowly across the wood floors. Then I step into the sunroom, where half-finished paintings lean against the wall, canvases still smelling faintly of oil and turpentine. I paint like no one is watching, because no one is. My favorite piece so far is a study of carnations in a cracked vase. Gregory's flower. I haven't signed it yet. I'm not ready. The day Heather was sentenced, I didn't attend the hearing. The court deemed her offenses civil, not criminal. Fraudulent conveyance, misrepresentation, and financial coercion. She pled no contest. In exchange, she received a suspended sentence, community service, and restitution payments. To me. Nolan wasn't as fortunate. Wire fraud, forgery, tampering with legal documents. He will be spending the next few years where manipulation carries no weight and charm means nothing. His expression when the charges were read? Empty. Not regretful. Just exposed. I thought it would feel like victory. It didn't, but it did feel clean. Sometimes I still hear echoes. Heather's voice when she said I was dead weight, the thud of the photo frame hitting the bottom of that cardboard box, Nolan's cold smirk as he slid the forged documents across the dining table. But those echoes are quieter now, less sharp. They no longer decide the rhythm of my days. Last week I hosted my book club here. Just 6 women, all in their 60s and 70s, all with stories you wouldn't believe. One of them, Miriam, brought lemon bars and said, "This house feels like a hug, Florence." I didn't tell her, but I nearly cried. After they left, I stood in the hallway barefoot, lights dimmed, and just listened to the quiet. For so long, silence was the sound of neglect, of being ignored, pushed aside. Now silence is where I hear myself most clearly. I went to Gregory's grave last Sunday, brought fresh carnations and no umbrella even though it rained. I knelt, ran my fingers along his name, and finally said aloud, "You were right." She did try to break me, but I didn't break. I paused, then added, "And I didn't break her either." That's the part you'd be proud of. A bird landed on the headstone across from his. I watched it tilt its head, then fly off. The wind lifted my collar, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't shiver. I stayed until the tea in my thermos turned cold. I left a carnation. Just one. Back home, I climbed the stairs to the attic studio, picked up my brush, touched the petals in the painting again, deeper reds, a bolder outline. Then I finally signed my name in the corner, F. Whitmore. I didn't look away when I did it. No hesitation, not anymore. They thought I would stay broken. They thought the silence would smother me, that being discarded, erased, would make me disappear. But silence is not the same as absence. Silence listens. Silence watches. Silence gathers. And in that silence, I rebuilt myself. There's a painting in my sunroom now. It's not finished, but it's the closest thing I've ever come to telling the truth in color. A woman, silver-haired, stands at the edge of dawn, not at the center, not demanding to be seen, just there, anchored in her own presence. The light doesn't chase her, it simply meets her. That woman is me. There were moments I could have retaliated harder, moments when my lawyer asked, "Do you want to press further?" And I said no. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because I no longer needed that kind of power. The greatest revenge, if it ever was revenge at all, was not returning what they did to me. It was returning to myself. I now keep fresh carnations by the sink. I paint every Wednesday. I've started journaling again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. Each night I write one page. Some entries are simple. Today I made soup from scratch. The neighbor's cat slept on my porch again. The sun hit the windows just right. For a second, I felt 20 others are heavier. Heather used to hum when she lied as a child. I wonder if she knew. Nolan reminds me of the boy in high school who cheated on tests but made everyone think he was brilliant. I still miss Gregory. But only the version of him I believed in, because the truth is, there were layers I hadn't let myself see before. Gregory had secrets. We all do. But his final gift to me, that line in the will, line 42, was real. He left me something unshakable, proof that I was worth protecting, even if it was too late to say it aloud. I don't wear my wedding ring anymore. It sits in a small velvet box next to the broken photo frame from that day. I didn't fix the glass. I let it stay cracked. As a reminder, healing is not forgetting. It's living alongside the memory, without letting it dictate your breath. One morning last week, a young woman from the community center where I sometimes volunteer asked if I would speak at an upcoming event. Something about resilience, she said, about how women reinvent themselves. I almost laughed. Me? Reinvented? But then I looked at my hands, no longer shaking. I looked at the email invitation, addressed to Miss Florence Whitmore, not mom, not widow. And I said yes, because sometimes we wait for a miracle, for someone to rescue us, for karma to come galloping like a white horse. But sometimes the miracle waits. It waits for us to look inward, to rise quietly, to step forward even if our voice trembles, even if no one claps, even if the door was never opened for us in the first place. It waits for us to open our own damn door. Before I go, I want to thank you for listening, for walking with me through this story, through pain, betrayal, and the quiet rebuild of a life worth living. And before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you and remember. Sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.